Could ancient humans become obese? Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. I want you to imagine something and really picture it in your head. Picture a Homo sapiens from 50,000 years ago. Now, I'm not talking about some cartoon caveman or a grunting creature from a movie. I mean a real human being with the exact same brain as yours, the exact same lungs, the same hunger, and the same capacity for joy. They're running the exact same biological hardware underneath that animal skin. Now imagine taking that elite survival machine and dropping them directly into a modern grocery store. They're standing right in the middle of the cereal aisle, just staring at a box of Honey Smacks. And that brings us to the central mystery of our explainer today. This ancient human is now facing 47 different types of cereal. They're walking past the frozen foods, the snack aisle, the bakery where sugar and butter are just doing incredible things. They have never, in their entire life, experienced anything remotely like the sheer concentration of available food. So not how do they react to self-checkout, but could this person, optimized by millions of years of evolution, actually become obese? We've been told our whole lives that our ancestors were lean, basically because they were prehistoric athletes, and we're just their disappointing couch-sitting descendants. But what if that story is entirely wrong? Section 1. The calorie-burning myth. So, the standard narrative goes that our ancestors were thin simply because they ran around all day. We picture them walking miles and miles, hunting and burning enormous amounts of energy while barely getting enough calories to scrape by. I mean, it sounds like perfect common sense, right? But to really understand ancient humans, scientists study the closest living equivalents we have today, which are surviving hunter-gatherer populations. The most extensively studied are the Hadza people of northern Tanzania. Hadza women literally walk miles every single day, digging up tubers in the hard African soil and carrying really heavy loads in the heat. The men track game across the open savanna. Now, compare that to your typical office worker in Chicago who sits at a computer for 8 hours a day. The Hadza's physical activity level would absolutely destroy the average modern person in just a matter of days. But here is where it gets wild. When researchers actually strapped precision activity monitors to Hadza adults, the results, which were published in a PLOS One study, completely dismantled this myth. You would totally expect the hunter-gatherers to burn drastically more calories. It just makes intuitive sense. But incredibly, the total daily energy expenditure between a highly active Hadza forager and a sedentary Western adult is statistically indistinguishable. They are exactly the same. A Hadza woman hauling water in the African heat burns roughly the same number of calories per day as an American woman who drives to her office and sits at a desk. No way, right? So how is that even mathematically possible? Well, it all comes down to something called metabolic adaptation. See, the human body is not just a simple machine that outputs more energy the harder you push it. Instead, and this is absolutely crucial to understand, think of your body as an extremely cautious accountant. When you start spending a lot more energy on one line item, like intense physical activity, that accountant quietly finds cuts somewhere else to make sure the total daily budget remains exactly the same. To balance those books, the Hadza body just naturally lowers its basal metabolic rate. That's the baseline energy used just to keep you breathing and functioning. The immune system gets slightly dialed back. Cellular maintenance processes, they run just a little leaner. Hormonal activity shifts. The sheer physical activity wasn't what kept ancient humans lean. The reality is that their environment simply wouldn't ever give them a prolonged caloric surplus. Scarcity was doing all of the heavy lifting. Section 2. The thrifty biology. Okay, so if physical activity wasn't this magic shield against obesity, what was actually happening inside their bodies? Well, the ancient human body was definitely not neutral about fat. It was aggressively, enthusiastically pro-fat. This is actually documented in what's called the thrifty gene hypothesis, proposed by a geneticist named James Neal way back in 1962. The idea is that natural selection specifically favored individuals who are incredibly efficient at storing energy as fat whenever food was around. Why? Because those were the exact individuals who survived the inevitable famines. Efficient fat-storing genes weren't some evolutionary mistake. They were a massive competitive advantage that kept people alive through the winter. What this means is that the ancient human body didn't actually want to be lean. It desperately, constantly wanted to store fat, but the environment physically wouldn't let it happen. And here is why this matters to you right now. You and your ancient ancestors share these exact same genes. The people who survived long enough to become your great-great-great ancestors were literally the absolute best at hoarding fat. Your biology is wired to do exactly the same thing the second food becomes available. Section 3. The modern collision. So the crucial point is, what happens when you take those exact same thrifty, fat-hoarding genes and place them into a modern world of 24/7 cheap calories, a world where, you can summon 3,000 calories to your front door with a phone in 5 minutes. We actually have a direct, real-world example of this collision. Look at the Pima people. For thousands of years, they lived in the Sonoran Desert as lean, active farmers. But when their water supply was diverted in the late 19th century, the U.S. government stepped in with a food assistance program filled with refined flour, lard, and sugar. Within an evolutionary instant, the Arizona Pima developed some of the highest rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes ever recorded. Meanwhile, their relatives just across the border in Mexico, who have identical DNA, kept eating a traditional diet and remained completely lean and metabolically healthy. Their genetics hadn't changed even a little bit, but their food environment had changed completely. It really comes down to this quote: same software, different inputs, completely different output. The thrifty gene was this brilliant survival feature for hundreds of thousands of years. It literally only became a bug the absolute second the environment of scarcity disappeared. Now, you might be wondering, couldn't an ancient human get fat if they just stumbled upon a massive bounty, like, say, a huge seasonal salmon run? Theoretically, sure, they could put on some extra weight, but they almost certainly couldn't reach clinical obesity. Why? Because natural foods, even really rich ones like wild salmon, have built-in satiety triggers. The fat and protein naturally trigger hormonal responses that basically force your body to wave the white flag and say, okay, I'm full. A modern bag of potato chips, on the other hand, is deliberately engineered to completely bypass those exact same fullness signals. And that brings us to this really fascinating concept called the bliss point. This is not an accident. The bliss point is a precisely calibrated ratio of salt, fat, and carbohydrates designed by food scientists to maximize pleasure while minimizing your brain's fullness signals. Nature never produced a bliss point food because nature had absolutely zero incentive to keep you eating forever. Only modern food industries, which obviously profit from continuous consumption, have that incentive. You can actually see this play out vividly in the archaeological record. For 300,000 years, hunter-gatherer skeletons show high bone density and really impressive metabolic health. Then, about 10,000 years ago, agriculture begins. We start building granaries, and almost immediately, things shift. The average human height drops by several inches, bone density goes down, cavities start showing up in teeth for the very first time, all thanks to refined grains. The ultimate irony here is that by inventing agriculture, we removed our fundamental biological constraint of scarcity. We essentially invented the modern grocery store 10,000 years ago. It just took us a while to see the full metabolic fallout. Now, what's really interesting here is that while the physical conditioning of people like the Hadza is completely genuine, and obviously movement provides massive, undeniable cardiovascular and psychological benefits, it is simply not a magic override switch for an engineered modern diet. Even if the Hadza kept walking miles every single day, if they fully adopted a Western diet packed with bliss point foods, the research strongly suggests they would absolutely still gain weight. The math shifts entirely on the intake side, not the burn side.
Section 4. We are ancient humans.
We've been talking throughout this explainer about ancient humans as if they are some totally distant, separate species. But the evolutionary gap between a human from 48,000 BCE and you watching this right now, it's zero. A few thousand generations is literally a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms. We aren't metaphorically ancient humans, we are literally ancient humans. We are running the exact same biological hardware, the same reward systems, and the exact same thrifty biology. So look, the next time you feel like you just can't stop after a few chips, you really need to understand that it is not a character flaw. It's your ancient nervous system desperately trying to maximize caloric intake against a food that was literally designed to defeat it. When you are totally full but the dessert menu still looks amazing, that isn't some shameful lack of discipline. That is your reward circuitry responding to fat and sugar exactly the way it was beautifully wired to respond for 300,000 years. Your body is doing exactly what it was built to do, in a world it was simply never built for. I really want you to take this paradigm shift to heart. It's not a character flaw. It's an ancient nervous system surviving engineered abundance. That ancient human we dropped into the cereal aisle at the very beginning of this explainer, he didn't avoid obesity because he had superior willpower or some lost ancestral virtue. He avoided it because his world simply wouldn't let him get fat. We finally gave him a world of true abundance, and now we are all living in the result. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. The mystery isn't really why we struggle with modern food. That mystery's pretty much solved. Your hardware works perfectly. So, If your body is doing exactly what it was brilliantly built to do, how will you choose to navigate an environment it was never built for?